Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual preview crew of Brandin, Marianne Lee, and Dan Schneier. One day later, you two, but that's still okay, right? It's not any different podcasting on a Thursday than a Wednesday, right? You guys feel the same?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact of the matter is, though, that one of the best players in fantasy football just went down for the year. So I think that adds a little intrigue to the podcast, and we'll probably get into that soon.
And that's an excellent segue, Dan. I wish I could say that we had the forethought to hold off until something like that happened, but we didn't. It was just dumb luck. So as you mentioned, Rob Gronkowski out indefinitely / rest of season with immediate back surgery. So Dan, what do we do with that? We've got Bennett there, obviously. It's kind of funny. The Patriots literally traded their third string tight end, AJ Derby, a couple weeks ago to Denver. So that's not an option. What do we do with the position there in New England now? And who's going to benefit from that? I mean, you've got, still the running backs out of the backfield that could see some extra action, right?
Yeah, and when Gronk missed time a couple weeks back on this show, it was actually you were out for the week, Michael, and it was me, Brandon, and Tags, and we talked about what to do with the situation, and we were all pretty much in unison, all in on Martellus Bennett that week, and mostly that had to do with his price, but also we thought there was a huge return coming. And then Brandon kind of tempered expectations last week when, she brought up the fact that Bennett is playing through an injury, and it's obviously clearly affecting his play, even though his advanced numbers look pretty damn good. I mean, if you look at his yards per route run, he's still up there in the top 3, even after a couple down weeks and running a few more routes with Gronk injured. But at the same time, I don't think we can trust him at this point. I think you got to turn your attention to guys like Julian Edelman over the middle, making plays. Maybe even a guy like Danny. And no, Jeff Fisher. I'm not talking about Danny Woodhead. And for those who don't know, Jeff Fisher mentioned Danny Woodhead as a player that the Rams have to watch on a conference call with Patriot supporters earlier this week. I'm talking about Danny.
Unbelievable.
Right? And Brandon Bolden, who I think has seen, 14 snaps offensively?
And breaking news, the Rams just signed Jeff Fisher to a 10-year extension. Nobody really knows why. But anyway, I'm talking about Danny Amendola. I think he can kind of get back into the picture and annoy fantasy football owners. This was what we saw from the Patriots during the playoffs in the past, and it just seems like a situation that might be rough if Edelman doesn't take charge, because I'm not ready to buy back in on Bennett. I've been burned too much this season. I think he's just playing with an injury that hasn't reported, that he's not talking about. So that's kind of where I stand on the situation. I don't know if you guys feel differently.
Yeah, what about you, Brandon? Who's someone that you'd be targeting in the wake of Gronk's absence now?
Yeah, I think Danny Amendola is someone that I definitely like for random touchdowns, right? I bring him up on random weeks where I think, gosh, we think it's going to be Julian Edelman, and it's always Danny Amendola. You know what I'm saying? Like, unbelievable how he works in those touchdowns. But I think what this does do, it tells me that Malcolm Mitchell is going to be relevant the rest of the season. I wasn't 100% into it because it's definitely seemed like 2 games back-to-back, and the usage seemed to be dependent on Gronk's injury. Well, that's now permanent. So I guess that's reality.
Your dog disagrees maybe with that take. So
super ticked right now. She wants to go play with the children next door because we're recording this at 6 p.m. when all the children are coming and going from daycare next door. So sorry, everybody.
Just let normally them eat them. That'll teach them.
That's right.
But to your point, though, Brandon, I mean, you've got Malcolm Mitchell, who's had 2 pretty good games the last 2 weeks. I think there was some concern with would he and Chris Hogan sort of be able to coexist because they kind of play the same role. But if last week's any indication, and I think this is probably a good template for the rest of the season for the Patriots, they probably both can be productive, meaning Hogan and Mitchell, right? I mean, is there one that you favor over the other, or are they about equal?
For me, I'm favoring Mitchell as of late. Obviously, Hogan's been dealing with injury and kind of going in and out of, playing time and in and out of being able to be in the actual game. But so I'm going to go with Mitchell in this one until we see a little more from Hogan as far as health is concerned.
Yeah, Dan, what about you, Hogan or Mitchell at this point? Because they're going to be hot names on the waiver wire if they aren't picked up already.
Right. And I'm actually all in on Mitchell because Mitchell's a guy who in the pre-draft process before he got selected to the Patriots by Georgia, I said the Patriots would be one of his best fits. And, the obvious thing when people think first when somebody's drafted the Patriots at the wide receiver position, and that's oh my God, it's going to take forever. Look at what happened to Dobson. Look at what happened to Boyd in the past. Look at what happened to all these guys, or Josh Boyce, sorry. Look at what happened to all these guys they've tried to bring through that system. But Mitchell's clearly taken a different route than past Patriots rookies. He's picked up the offense a lot faster than most people expected, and he has the type of guy that really flashed. Like, he was one of the top high school prospects. He looked awesome at Georgia before an injury, an ACL, early on in his collegiate career. This is a guy who can create separation. He's explosive. He's big. He has huge hands. Tom Brady said something about how he has Gronk-like hands, and that's an awesome thing to see. I think if you're a Malcolm Mitchell owner, so to me, he's one of my top waiver wire guys this week, and he's somebody who I'm kind of all in on as far as the Patriots situation goes going forward.
Okay, well, let's talk about another stud tight end who's battling injury that we found out today might or most likely won't play. That'd be Jordan Reed of Washington this week, which puts Vernon Davis, who I think we all left for dead at some point, squarely back in the streaming conversation. So, Brandon, how do you like Vernon Davis's chances this week? Or is there another target in that Redskins offense that will probably get more attention there?
I hate Vernon Davis this week. The Arizona Cardinals are giving up nothing to opposing tight ends. It's unbelievable. Between them and the Kansas City Chiefs, I just want to sit everyone against them, and I mean literally everyone. I don't care who you're putting in front of me. Next week, I'm actually on Monday going to do an entire article dedicated to the lack of consistency and/or predictability of the tight end position this year. It's been unlike anything else that we've ever seen. To be entirely frank, and I know I'm alone on this, I'm throwing Vance Mcdonald out in a lot of places. And you can call me crazy all you want, but you look at his stats. He is the most consistent tight end over the last 5 weeks in terms of fantasy production in the National Football League, who is still going to be playing in the National Football League this weekend. So, I mean, I know that sounds crazy town, but it's 2016. That's all that's happening. And it started with David Bowie. So, I mean, let's be honest. It's gone downhill since there. And I'm just going to tell you right now that Vernon Davis is going to be a fantastic player moving forward. But this particular week, you probably can find someone else. But on the other hand, maybe Arizona won't take Vernon Davis as seriously as they would Jordan Reed, although I don't know why they would. Vernon Davis is actually a top 20 tight end in both standard and PPR scoring right now, with Jordan Reed being a baller. So, certainly if you need to play Vernon Davis, you don't feel great about it, but times are tough. We don't have Gronk or Reed. What are we doing anymore? And Greg Olsen stunk. He's averaging less than 5 fantasy points per game right now over the last 5 weeks.
It's tough times out there. It's rough.
And then Jimmy Graham, had the whole Seattle Seahawks implode on him last week. It's just, I don't know.
Well, Dan, before we move on, what do you think about the Redskins receiving options this week? I mean, is Jamison Crowder an option without Jordan Reed there? I mean, who's going to be getting more attention there if it's not Davis?
Yeah, as far as the Redskins goes this week, you want to kind of avoid the outside option because you don't want to have the matchup with Pierre Garçon, or maybe it's Deshaun Jackson against Patrick Peterson. We all saw what happened to Julio Jones last week. But I think that Crowder really eats and picks up some of those targets because they're going to have to go somewhere. This is an offense that moves the ball through the air. This is also an offense that doesn't really run the ball that often, and it's not going to run the ball successfully against this Cardinals run defense. So Crowder in the slot has the best option and pretty much the best matchup there. So that's the only one I'm kind of buying into. But I actually wrote about Cousins in my start sit column because he's someone I'm actually sitting this week. And I know it's freaking crazy to say that. It's probably even crazier than Brandon's calling McDonald because I actually, spoiler, love McDonald this week, and I'll get to that later. But
oh, good. Yes, thank you. Come to the dark side.
I'm on that dark side. And it's not that dark because he's had at least 50 yards or a touchdown in 2 of his last 4. Or I'm sorry, in all 4 of his last games. So anyway, back to this. I'm actually advising to sit Cousins this week, and I get it. He threw for 450 and 3 touchdowns last week, and he's been unbelievable, 40 touchdowns and 10 interceptions since taking over for the Redskins, dating back to 2015. But But this Cardinals defense is unbelievable. They're our third best defense in pass rush overall. That's because they have guys on the edge really creating tons of pressure. Chandler Jones, that was a great trade for them. He's been great this year. Calais Campbell, he's a D-end. He plays in line for them, but he gets a lot of pass rush opportunities. And then Marcus Golden off the other edge. So I think they'll give that offensive line trouble because remember, the Redskins are playing without Trent Williams, and they haven't been tested yet because they played the Cowboys and they played the Packers without Matthews. So it's not, they didn't really have too many tough, difficult options at edge rusher. But this is going to be a team, the Cardinals, that are really going to challenge their backup left tackle. Nesh, I'm never going to be pronounce this guy's name right. It's like Nesh Key or Nesh He. He was a 2012 undrafted free agent. This guy is not. He's been decent so far for the Redskins in Trent Williams' absence, but he's not going to hold up against the Cardinals pass rush. So, I'm not really big, and I know I kind of went on a tangent there, but I'm not big on the Redskins passing game. But there will be some volume, and it's going to go to Crowder, I think.
Well, yeah, and to sort of further your point, Dan, you've got the Cardinals who give up the third least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks and the least amount of points to fantasy running backs. So,
right.
You might as well, you might want to fade the entire team this week, possibly. But, all right, let's move on from
I'm gonna say, I think,
yes.
I will say, I understand sitting Kirk Cousins if you have a stud. I think in season long, though, don't overthink this. I mean,
Sure.
I think the guy is on fire.
We might need to do a side bet here then, Brandon.
Yeah,
let's do that.
I'm a slave to the matchups here.
I know. And I just think, I get these crazy questions like, do I start Jameis Winston or Kirk Cousins? And it's week 13. You know what I'm saying? Don't screw yourself.
What about Colin Kaepernick or Cousins? Because I'm taking Cap.
Yeah, I mean, but that's different because Cap is like a freaky deek with all his like running yards. So it's different. I mean, yeah, I'm starting Cap over a lot of people. To me, that makes sense. But I want to make sure I'm not getting Matthew Stafford versus Kirk Cousins. But I get those questions. So that's why I want to be clear. Those middling guys are still not Kirk Cousins.
Okay.
So
even in a bad matchup.
No, I want to do a bet though. Let's do this.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So Brandon, is it fair to say you think Kirk Cousins will finish as a top 12 fantasy quarterback this week?
I do.
And Dan, do you think he will finish as a top 12 fantasy quarterback this week?
I do not.
There you go. So
there it is.
What are we putting on the line?
Ooh, see, that's the tricky part.
He's going to be right behind Matt Barkley. I'm just kidding.
How about this? No, how about this? If Brandon loses, she's got to put Kirk Cousins, if Dan loses, he's got to put Kirk Cousins' avatar or picture in his avatar on Twitter for a day, 24 hours. Okay. And if Brandon loses, oh gosh, who does Brandon just genuinely fade all the time? I'm trying to remember. Who? Yeah, Ryan Tannehill. Okay, perfect. So, Brandon, if you lose, you have to put Ryan Tannehill's photo on your avatar for Twitter for 24 hours. Deal?
All right.
Okay, standard scoring, which is what, 4 or 6 points for a touchdown? That's the
Four.
Okay.
Amateur hour?
Yeah, what is this?
This
isn't your work league, Mike.
What do you God. Okay, good. Well, then we have that on the record. I like that. I'm looking forward to that. Okay.
All right.
All right. Let's move on now to not injury news, just, I don't know, sad news, sad and disappointing news. We had a couple of receivers who either season long or just last week really, really struggled. I'm talking, of course, about Brandin Cooks and his really odd 0-target game against the Rams last week, despite the Saints scoring 49 points. Dan, what's your take on what happened with Cooks? I mean, it almost seems like he would have gotten a target by accident even, and that didn't even happen.
Yeah, it's an odd situation. I don't tend to look into this as much as some other people do. I know a lot of people are now off of him entirely. I think this could be a squeaky wheel situation, though, this week in a high-scoring game against the Lions in that dome where Brees is just like 340 yards passing or more every time. And you know what? Not only can it be a squeaky wheel, I think it could also be a contrarian play because people love to chase points in daily fantasy. Maybe not the people listening to these type of podcasts, but the average player, the majority of players are going to be rostering Michael Thomas this week. That's just how it goes. And if you can get in on Cooks, you're getting a low ownership percentage there. And you're getting a guy who's probably just as likely to to break off those big plays, or probably more likely as far as big plays go than Thomas. And maybe the volume won't be there on a normal basis, but maybe this week, squeaky wheel. You saw Drew Brees after the game commented on the Cooks thing, so it's in his mind. So to me, I'm not ready to jump ship there.
Yeah, and I did see something, I don't know if you two did, where essentially the Rams treated Cooks like, the 1A receiver with a lot of bracket coverage, a lot of double teaming.
Right.
Meaning he just – and look, Brees is a smart enough quarterback. He's going to take advantage of that. He's not going to force anything if he doesn't have to. So,
exactly.
All right. So, real quick
you
then.
want to hear something funny about Brees, though?
Always.
Drew Brees is 33rd in the league right now with a 7.2 yard depth per aimed throw over the last 5 weeks.
So what does
and
that
yet
mean
he's
then?
leading the league in yards.
Yeah,
and he has the 33rd ADOT. So
It's
that's
called volume.
it's volume.
bad
It's
news.
after the catch. It's
Right.
like it's all.
That's bad news for Cooks, though, because Cooks was doing a lot of his work earlier in the season on those go routes. He was just dialing them up to Cooks, and now that kind of tells me, okay, maybe he's looking at Thomas and Snead underneath.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. So now I think we're seeing what's
Sound the
happening
alarm.
to his numbers. Now I still think that airing it out is the way to go, and Detroit's just bad. So I'm not worried. I don't know what I love more, Brees against Detroit at home, or Matt Ryan against the Chiefs at home. It's just so delicious. So I'm not completely off Brandin Cooks, but I do think this is a pattern. This is 33rd in the league. Isn't like a dip; it's a dive in ADOT for him. So just FYI.
So real quick then, because look, Cooks is still a top 15 fantasy receiver on the season, despite, the egg he had. So for you two, is he still a wide receiver 1 rest of the season, or is he, squarely in that wide receiver 2 category now?
Who is a wide receiver 1 anymore? I mean, I think we're going to have
Mike
to
Evans is at a pretty good stretch.
Who?
Mike Evans is at a pretty good stretch.
Yeah. I mean, he's also had a couple, games, he's not Julio Jones, who's had
Now
some
that is
really,
a wide receiver 1. Yes, it is.
well, but he screwed you 4 times this season with less than 5 fantasy points. That's incredible. So I'm telling you, it's unfortunate. And I wrote an article today being or this week saying, listen, you're never going to find a fantasy analyst who's going to tell you to sit Julio Jones in any matchup. That's absurd. So we all need to just move on. And I kind of feel that way about Brandin Cooks. I kind of feel that way about all of our top tier guys. But I also went through this week and I looked at who right now is averaging the most fantasy points per game since week 9. And it's really interesting, who's on this list and who isn't on this list. And I did the top 10 for the quarterbacks. I did the top 20 for the wide receivers, top 10, the other positions. And it was interesting because Tom Brady's not on the list. There's some very interesting people that are and are not on that list, and part of it's because sometimes people have bad freaking games, and I just have to say that about Brandin Cooks. It's not let's not put him in the DeAndre Hopkins category where he's had a legitimately bad season, right? He had a bad game.
Or Allen Robinson, who we'll talk about in a second.
We're going to talk about him, yeah.
All right.
Allen Robinson has a horrible schedule coming up. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, so that's another good segue. You've got Allen Robinson, obviously huge disappointment this season, along with the rest of the Jaguars offense, I would say. So Dan, let's go to you first. As far as Allen Robinson goes, I mean, we already know that he hasn't been nearly as valuable as where he's been drafted in any league in any format this season. But what are you doing with him the rest of the way if he's on your team? Is he even flex worthy at this point, or where do you put him?
Well, he's not matchup independent anymore. I mean, he's matchup dependent. You can't start. You can do it. You can start him this week against Aqib Talib on the outside.
But you'll lose. That's
with
what you're
Blake
saying.
Bortles at quarterback and the Denver pass rush getting healthy and the Jacksonville Jaguars pass protection bad all season. But you really can't hope to get more. You can't expect to get more than 6 points in a matchup like this one. And that's why he's kind of matchup dependent guy, because the volume's still been there. He's still been getting targets all season long, but the targets are off. They're off target because Blake Bortles, after a mirage of a season last year, that was really just kind of a narrative, a false narrative, in my opinion, because a lot of Bortles' stats last season came in garbage time and came when the defenses were playing cover too. But Bortles has regressed this season. If you look at his mechanics, they're completely off. He looks a lot like the guy we saw at UCF, and he's really not a guy who I ever expected to be a good NFL quarterback. I know the Jags kind of surprised people when they took him in the top 5, and they didn't really make any mention of it. And maybe they're sold on him. I don't think they have any other option, but I'm not. And I'm not sold on any receivers who are catching passes from him. And I'm not sold on that Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line. So with all those things considered, Allen Robinson, to me, volume included, I don't really care because there's a lot of options these days at receiver that we'll get to soon, obviously. He's a guy who I'm only playing in the best matchups, and Brandon knows a little bit more about his upcoming schedule, so I'm sure she feels the same way.
Brandon.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was like, well, I didn't know if you had something to add to that. I mean,
listen,
no,
this is about you.
This is about me. Great. He plays at home against Denver this week, at home against Minnesota next week. Then he is at Houston, and then he plays at home against Tennessee. That's week 16.
Not ideal.
So also, here's the other problem with that. Neither Denver or Minnesota have dynamic offenses that he's going to have garbage time it.
Right.
Like literally, they're just going to hold him, and they're only going to win by like 10 points. It's not like he's going to get blown out by New Orleans, right? And then have to throw the ball, and then we just pray, right, that he gets in the end zone. No, it's just going to be a 13-3 kind of game, and we're going to all move on with our lives. And that's my problem with his schedule moving forward. And that's a really big problem for Allen Robinson because he has to have the volume because, again, the targets are off. They're not getting in his hands. So it's not even like he can just make a couple catches off a couple targets.
Right.
Well, yeah, and let me ask you this question. So you've got Allen Robinson on the season, 53 catches, 591, about 54 yards a game. So last season, obviously, he had his breakout, 80 for 1,400 and 14 touchdowns. His rookie season, though, also averaging 54 yards a game and finished with 2 touchdowns. So I guess my question is, do you two think he's the Allen Robinson of his rookie season or his sophomore season? I mean, this season aside, this season is done and over with. But looking forward, like if you're in a dynasty league or even looking way ahead to redrafts next year, which Allen Robinson do you think that actually is? His rookie year one or his sophomore year one?
Yeah. I mean, as far as fantasy goes, I'm going to say this year. What we see now is what we're going to see going forward until they make a quarterback change. I don't subscribe to the idea that Blake Bortles can get this fixed. When the clock starts going off in your head too fast, and when you start getting into those really poor mechanics, it's tough to really dig yourself out of that. I mean, you haven't seen too many quarterbacks completely change their mechanics over the course of their careers. You've seen Tim Tebow try it. You've seen plenty of guys over the course of the years. That was probably an awful example, but I could Jeff George. There's guys who have tried to do this over the course of their careers, and it hasn't worked. And I don't think the Jaguars are ready to give up on Bortles. I think he's the starter for next season, and I think that's going to really hamper Allen Robinson. And same thing goes for DeAndre Hopkins with Brock Osweiler.
Brandon, what about you? Which Allen Robinson do you think we're seeing?
Well, I agree with Dan on this being a quarterback issue, except that I also think it's a dropsy issue. I don't think that we have attributed enough blame for his stats on what Allen Robinson himself has done. Sometimes when you watch this game, and I think part of it, of course, is probably feeling demoralized because he's like, why can't this guy throw the ball? So that when it does throw the ball and it hits him in the hands, he's kind of like, whoa, what a surprise. And he drops it. I mean, there have been a lot of those games. You see it and you're just like, what are you doing? So I think this is not only a quarterback issue. I think this is a coaching issue and a team culture issue. They have a real problem. They don't know how to win yet. I always refer back to that moment. Remember when Justin Tuck was playing with the Raiders and they were going to win their first game of the season and the defense started freaking out and they needed to get back in line because they needed one more play. And Justin Tuck was like freaking out. He's like, get back. And after in the press conference, someone brought it up because, I mean, they almost lost because they would have gotten a penalty. There was all this disaster going on. And he said, yeah, it's like, I just like, no one here knows how to win. And he was so serious about it, though, and people laughed, right? Because that's funny. But no, I think you have to learn to win. And I don't think that Jacksonville knows that yet. So they just have defeated themselves. So until there's a big overhaul, I just think he's definitely not a first rounder like we thought he was moving forward. I think we have to reevaluate a lot of first rounders, frankly, first and second rounders moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be what I say. I think he'll be fine. I think he has upside, but do I think he'll get 14 touchdowns in a season again? That's a toughie.
So 2 things on that, and then we will take a quick break. One of my favorite stats has nothing to do with players, but with Gus Bradley, who in his 4 years as Jaguars coach has yet to beat a team that finished with a winning record. Did you two know that?
No.
I
He
did.
hasn't beaten a team that had a winning record at the end of the year, 9-7 or better, in 4 years. Like, that's a pretty good sign that maybe you are not a good. And then to your point, though, Brandon, as far as the dropsies go, something that surprised me that I just looked up. So Allen Robinson, his first year, his catch rate 59.3%. So not horrible, but also not great. I mean, not elite receiver type catch rate. Last season in his breakout, it dropped to 53% catch rate. So he had 80 catches despite dropping 47% of his targets. And this season, it's dropped even more to a flat 50%. So I think you're onto something there too, Brandon, with the drops, which is, look, Allen Robinson needs a lot of help, I think, to be a very good fantasy receiver. And if he doesn't get it, like Dan said at quarterback, then you're screwed.
Well, and every time we have these like situations where we talk about the situation in Jacksonville, everyone's like, yeah, but it's because Blake Bortles is so bad. And we just never bring up that Allen Robinson has not helped himself whatsoever this season.
Yep.
And I just think it's time that we give other people a little bit of an assessment of what's actually happening here. So thank you. I appreciate you bringing up the rates because it's a big problem for him. And it's unfortunate because I'd like him to not have that rate.
Right. And especially if it's declining, that's not really the trend you want to see.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we will get to all of our daily fantasy starts and sits for the week. All right, everyone, welcome back. All right, so we've got week 13 coming up. We've got the Cowboys and Vikings tonight, which by the time people listen to this will be over. So I'm hoping it's a good game. But say for that, Dan, who do you got up first as a start for you in daily this week?
So we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'm going with Colin Kaepernick this week. I think if you look at it over the past 4 weeks, guess what? There's only one quarterback who scored more fantasy points than Colin Kaepernick, and that's Aaron Rodgers. And if you go over the past two, if you take out 9 and 10, if you look at just weeks, not 9 and 10. If you look at just weeks 12 and 9, the 2 weeks where Kaepernick didn't face tough defenses, because in the other weeks he faced the Cardinals defense, and he also faced. Sorry, I'm just looking this up again. He had Cardinals and New England, and sandwich in between. And in between those was Buffalo and Miami. In those 2 weeks, he was the number 1 scoring fantasy quarterback. So for some reason, even though all this is true and he scored that many points over the past 4 weeks, Kaepernick, he's just the 14th most expensive quarterback on DraftKings, on FanDuel. He's the 13th most expensive. So we're looking at a guy who's still being priced way too low for what he's able to do. And again, he has another good matchup against a crumbling Bears defense. They just lost Jarrell Freeman, their captain of their defense, their best linebacker in coverage, and overall, he was suspended for PEDs. Leonard Floyd returned to practice briefly, but he's not ready to play this week. So, this is a team that's completely beat up. The Bears are doing their best impression of the 2015 Giants, and that means 16 players on injured reserve. They just put their 16th on today. So, again, beat up defense, great matchup, high-scoring quarterback who's only priced as a back-end QB1, basically a QB2. I just love it.
Yeah, and I think the summary on that is you've got Kaepernick, who there's not very much talent around him there in San Francisco, and he's got a lot to play for just personally. Right. Meaning he's probably going to be a free agent. I mean, this is his audition for next year. So, I mean, there's extra incentive. Not that other quarterbacks don't have the incentive to do well, but I like just the situation. I mean, look, San Francisco is a bad team. They're going to be taking chances and airing it out because they've got nothing to lose at this point. They don't have to be conservative whatsoever. So, Brandon, what about you? Quarterbacks that you're starting this week?
Well, I mean, are we talking about DFS in particular? We are, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. No. I think actually, and I don't want to get into much of a fight here, put too much of a fine point on it. I think if you're doing a tournament, I don't think anyone is going to start Kirk Cousins. No,
Okay.
But I just want to say that he's thrown for over 300 yards in 6 games so far this season.
You are all
Jordan
about
Reed's
the brand,
injury is
Brandon.
crazy.
Love it.
I just want to say that over the last, since week 9, Marcus Mariota and Dak Prescott are tied at the top for points per dropback at 0.71. Tied at 3rd is Drew Brees and Kirk Cousins. You always want to be tied with Drew Brees, right? In life. I would say. So I just think that he is someone that I'm considering because no one believes in him. And he's cheap too. He's not in the top 10 in terms of pricing for DFS on any platform. Also, not even in the top 15 in any platform. Tyrod, I score a lot of points, Taylor, that no one talks about. He's like the poor man's Colin Kaepernick, but cheaper, because now everyone's on to Kaepernick. His prices have gone way up. His fantasy points have been a little bit all over the map, but last week he put over 20 fantasy points regardless of the format. He's yet to throw over 300 yards in a game this season, but he has 118 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in his last 2 games. Depending on whether Sammy Watkins is a go or not, he is a very interesting play at Oakland. Their defense has certainly improved, but for some reason, Tyrod Taylor is able to do this with little to no weapons. It's really kind of unbelievable. No one's really talking about that. It's pretty crazy.
It's weird why people don't use Tyrod Taylor when he has that nickname. Right? Like, I would have thought more people would draft him if his nickname was Tyrod. All I get is fantasy points Taylor. But
he's just so he is pretty interesting because on DraftKings he's only $5,700. You could do a lot with that money. Yeah.
And just throwing it back to Cousins for a second. I don't want to sound like a hater. I am drinking water, not a glass of Haterade. But
no, you're not. No.
I'm gonna say this: if you want to, in my opinion, if you want to go, and I don't mind the concept that Brandon's rolling with there. She's rolling with a cheap player in a matchup that would tell you don't play him in. Because therefore, with a great track record of scoring fantasy points, and that seems like a solid recipe. But if you want to do that for me, I'd rather just play Ben Roethlisberger against a Giants pass defense that's been really good this season, but definitely vulnerable. And Roethlisberger's numbers at home have been great, and I don't think he'll have high ownership either. I haven't seen much talk at all about him. So that's kind of where I stand as far as Cousins, and I guess we'll kind of figure that one out next week with our bet. But one other guy I just did want to jam in there at QB because I'm actually having even higher ownership so far in my early models and my early teams than Kaepernick, and that would be Russell Wilson. Wilson threw for $151 last week, so everyone's kind of off on this. I think it's a nice contrarian play from that reason. Points chasers aren't going to be using him, but he gets this Carolina Panthers defense that really just isn't there. They're not good in coverage. And I think the main thing for me with Wilson is that he ran for 80 yards rushing last week. And that was more yards total than he had in every game except for in all games but one. So I'm sorry, I said that wrong. That was more yards rushing than he's had in all games combined. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty incredible. But that just shows me he's healthy again. He can move around. He can make plays on the run. And I don't think this Carolina Panthers secondary can hold up in pass coverage if Russell Wilson is making plays with his feet. So we'll see what happens there. But he's my top guy. And again, he's really cheap too on DraftKings.
Well, and I want to be clear. I actually think the best strategy, if you're playing cash, is to pay up for Drew Brees or Matt Ryan. I mean, to be entirely frank. I mean, I just think that there is if they fail, something crazy happened. Now it's 2016 again. David Bowie has screwed us all, but
and Prince, don't leave Prince out.
Oh yeah, no, Prince. I'm from Minnesota. Are you kidding? My friends are still crying in purple. But I will say that I would pay up for them. Same with running back. I'm going to give you other options, but I really think you should pay up.
Yeah,
I like that idea. My worry with that is this week, as far as paying up goes, is there's not that much value at running back and receiver at the lower tier pricing. So it's like I worry about that from that standpoint. There's not, you don't have a crazy injury that happened. You got a cheap running back, really. Mm-hmm. So because of that reason, that's why I find myself paying down at quarterback, just because I can't really fit the lineups with running back and receiver cheap plays. But we'll get to that soon.
Well, no one cares about tight ends anymore, so just go cheap.
Yeah, just go cheap. Vance
McDonald. That's right.
Another note, though, Dan, on Wilson, though, you've got Kuechly, who is unlikely to play again thanks to that concussion, which, completely opens up the middle of the field, too, for Wilson. So, all right. So, Dan, those were your starts for this week at quarterback. Who do you got sitting this week besides Kirk Cousins? We've covered that enough, I think.
Yeah, obviously, we went into Cousins, and obviously I'm not a fan, but I also don't like Jameis Winston, who actually Brandon mentioned earlier as maybe a counterpoint to Cousins. Probably what I would say is the best kept secret right now in pro football, and people are not talking about it enough, is how good this Chargers defense has been. It's been a complete turnaround for this defense ever since Joey Bosa was added to the front. And obviously Bosa has been the Chargers' highest graded defender according to our metrics this season. That's something you can obviously tell just from watching a single Chargers snap on defense. But right now they own our 9th best cumulative pass rush grade and our 5th best pass coverage grade. That's unbelievable because last year they were in the bottom third for the entire season. So it's not just Bosa. Melvin Ingram's having his best season of his career off the edge as an edge rusher. Brandon Meeben's been pretty good on the interior. And Casey Hayward, a guy they kind of picked up late in free agency a couple years back from the Packers, has been really good in pass coverage. So I don't want Jameis Winston in this matchup. The Chargers, again, like I said, over all those stats combined to show you that the Chargers pass defense has limited opposing quarterbacks to just 5 touchdowns over the past 4 weeks, and they've intercepted them 5 times. Those are not good numbers. I don't think Jameis Winston and the Buccaneers pass offense is the one that's going to buck that trend. So I'm off on Winston.
Brandon, what about you? Which quarterbacks are you sitting this week?
Oh man, who am I not sitting? No, you
got to start someone, so you got to sit someone too.
I think I have some concerns about Dak tonight. I think he'll be okay, but I don't think it's gonna be crazy. I think this is gonna be another Ezekiel Elliott, just control the clock. We don't need to score that many points anyway kind of games. I mean, again, the problem with playing the Vikings and the Broncos is that they're great on defense and you don't have to score a lot of points.
Right.
So, I think that is what it is. Cam Newton, I mean, again, we have to talk about these top tier guys that are disappointing. And I certainly don't want to play Cam Newton at Seattle when he's been disappointing all season. Now, last year, I actually, said to play him against Seattle at home. And he did. He was awesome at over 20 points and a rushing touchdown. So I don't want to say that it's not possible. We just haven't seen that version of Cam Newton all year. And again, it's kind of like, we don't want people to feel crazy when they're playing these people over and over again, and it's like hitting their head against the wall. It's like, I feel bad telling you to sit Cam Newton, but certainly in DFS, I cannot tell you to start him.
Yeah.
So I guess, for me, in a nice way, kind of, what are you doing? You know what I'm saying? What are you doing?
And with Cam, something that I've noticed here that a lot of people obviously have noticed, he's so much of his game, or a big part of it, is the running aspect of it. I mean, he was a sure bet for 500 rushing yards every season. I mean, it was really impressive what he was able to do with that. He's not getting anywhere close to that this season. I mean, that dimension of his game has been completely taken away. So if he doesn't have that and he becomes one-dimensional, it's just going to be tough. I mean, he's not going to be a gunslinger like Aaron Rodgers who can chuck 4 touchdowns in a game. It's just not going to happen.
And it used to be like, oh, great, Cam Newton has that floor because of his rushing, right? But the problem is that his floor, like you said, it's been questionable at best. So far this season, he does have 5 rushing touchdowns, and the Seattle Seahawks have allowed 3 to opposing quarterbacks this season. That's reasonably high. That is a possibility. The problem is, after he does that, he does nothing else.
Right.
So I got 6 points, but I'm not going to get to 20 anytime soon because the guy has the less than 50% completion rate right now. Less than 50%. And it's not like he's like, throwing it all over the map. And speaking of, and we're going to talk about him later who I'm not playing, Greg Olsen. He's ruined Greg Olsen. I didn't know that was possible.
It's really sad. All right, so let's move on to running backs, Brandon, and let's do both starting and sitting this week for you.
Okay, well, again, we're all going to play Ezekiel Elliott. We're all going to play David Johnson. We're all going to play whoever we can. I'm very sad about not having DeMarco Murray at our, disposal. But I did want you to know that David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott, and DeMarco Murray all have more fantasy points in PPR scoring than Antonio Brown, who is the #1 PPR scoring wide receiver this year.
Interesting.
Wacky doodle.
Yeah.
They are also the most consistent players, which again is why I'm telling people to pay up for running back. It's incredibly hard for me to find people that I like. In fact, when I was writing the DFS bargains this week, I started it off with, I just don't think I can tell you to do this anymore. I mean, I just, it's such a, no one was injured. There was nothing really crazy going on. There was just no blatant DFS bargain. It was a very difficult article to write, and it kind of felt like just chasing points. But anyway, I think that you do have to consider Dion Lewis and James White, both of them actually against the Rams after seeing what Mark Ingram did to them. Normally, I would say that the Rams are kind of like a middle of the road kind of defense against the run. I think their stats sometimes were a little overinflated, as we saw, but they're on the road 2 tough games in a row. That's rather demoralizing, being at the Superdome and then having to travel to New England. That's a horrible situation to be in. So I think they're going to take advantage of that. Now, the problem is I'm not going to know whether it's Dion or James White, which is why this is a tournament play only.
Okay. Dan, starting and sitting at running backs this week for you.
So one of my favorite plays this week that I'm now doubling back on, and I really wanted to go with, was Mark Ingram, who obviously now looks like he's not going to suit up. But Ingram he's actually been just destroying the NFL since that week 8 benching.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy. Like if you look at it,
maybe Sean Payton's a genius?
Yeah.
Question mark?
But if he goes, he's a top play for me. He's been since that week 8 bench, and he's led the NFL in our elusive rating. That's because he has a 3.40 yards per carry after contact average, which is the top in the league. And if he doesn't go, I think you can kind of turn around that volume to somebody like Hightower, and you can feel confident playing him because, again, the Lions have been bad all around on defense, but they've been really bad against the run. They're a 30th best run defense this year. And I put quotations around the word best, even if I'm not using them air quotes. But yeah, and in addition to Ingram, I'm actually going to roll with Jordan Howard this week. I think he's getting completely overlooked in daily fantasy because there's a lot of top guys that Brandon mentioned that people are going to be owning and people are going to be paying up for. And Howard comes in with that 6,900 on DraftKings and a similar pricing on FanDuel. And you look at him and you're like, I don't want to play this guy. He's expensive and he's Jordan Howard. But at the same time, over the 49ers, come on, we're talking about almost a historically bad run defense. They've allowed 171.8 yards per game, 5.1 yards per carry. That's the most in the league. They have our 29th best ranking, and that's really only because they started off decent with Navarro Bowman, and a lot of the guys who have been helped that run defense earlier this season aren't there. And then you're looking at Howard, who played almost every snap for the Bears last week, finished with 127 yards, 21 touches. Howard, as far as like overall stats go, Howard's averaging 5.1 yards per carry this season. Only Jay Ajayi has more yards per carry, and only Jay Ajayi has a better elusive rating than Howard over the course of the season. So we're looking at a really good player in a really good matchup, and I'm all in on it.
Yeah, and one more note on that, Dan. The 49ers give up the most fantasy points to running backs of any team in the league. So I think you might be onto something. So,
can I say one thing? I am done with Jerick McKinnon, and if you guys continue to tell me he's talented, I'm just going to string everybody up. Yeah, I want fantasy points. And I know you keep telling me Matt Asiata's not talented. That's fine. I see a guy in the end zone. That's what I see. And if both guys are getting me 40 points, but one of them scores a touchdown, I want the guy who's getting the touchdown. And I can't keep telling people that Jerick McKinnon is a reasonable option. I just can't do it. It's also a bad matchup against the Cowboys.
There you go. So that's your sit for the week, I take it.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, what about you? Running back, you're sitting this week. Be careful.
Yeah. Oh. You're right.
Sorry, just dropping a latte. Don't worry about it.
It's okay. Yeah. Your husband, I'm sure he'll be happy cleaning that one up later. While we're on the podcast, so. We'll just let him do it. But yeah. I'm gonna get back into this quickly. I don't know, that was a bad joke, but I'm gonna get back into this quickly, and I'm gonna go with 2 guys.
Redeem yourself, Dan. Redeem yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'll redeem myself after this week if these 2.
It's a very feminist comment. Like I'm glad your husband's gonna love cleaning that for you. You're right.
It's all about equality.
I didn't know where to go with it. I had to do something quick. It was awful.
I like it.
Moving on. My 2 guys I'm going to sit this week, or I want to sit this week, and it's crazy to say because if you own these guys, you're going to be like, no, I got to play these guys and hope for the best. I'm going to start with Todd Gurley, running back for the Rams against the Patriots. Gurley is not matchup proof. He's not that elite running back you overdrafted in round 1. Instead, he's a guy who kind of needs to get lucky with the touchdown every week. And guess who his matchup is against? The Patriots. And we've talked about this before on this show. You've heard this if you ever listen to any football show. Bill Belichick's main goal every week is to take away the number one weapon. And this week it gets a lot easier because there's no one else he has to really worry about on this Rams offense except for Gurley. So when you combine that with the fact that this Patriots run defense is our second best according to our metrics, and they've been in the top 5 all season, this is just an ugly, ugly matchup. I'm not playing him. I think 6 to 10 fantasy points is kind of like his floor and ceiling unless he scores. And then I'm actually not big on Jay Ajayi this week. There's volume there. There's for sure guaranteed volume, but this Ravens run defense, our top run defense, they even limited Ezekiel Elliott to under 100 yards and a sub 4.0 yards per carry average this season. Even last week, Bengals workhorse Jeremy Hill, everyone's like, okay, Gio's done. Let's roll out Hill. Well, if it wasn't for his 6 for 61 line in the passing game, it would have been a really, really ugly game for Hill.
Just like we thought.
Right. So,
well, and with the Ajayi, Dan, to that point, I mean, there was a bit of, not controversy, but there was a lot of sort of breaking news with that Dolphins offensive line on Sunday, where a lot of people were concerned, hey, they're not playing with 3 starters. Is that going to affect Ajayi? And it did. I mean, he had a touchdown, which salvaged some value, but I mean, the production just wasn't there like it has been the previous week. So I think you're onto something there. Brandon, receivers, starting and sitting. Go.
Okay. Well, I would say that if you are someone that's looking for a kind of Hail Mary type for tonight, I would go with Cole Beasley in the slot against the Minnesota Vikings. That is by far their Achilles heel. They give up the majority of the yardage there, including Anquan Bolden last week, a ton of catches and 2 touchdowns, actually. I just think that you have to pay attention to that, and I think Cole Beasley is going to be the main recipient of that kind of workload. It's not going to be Jason Witten. I'm telling you, if you need 30 to 40 yards, Jason Witten's your guy. That's it. That's his game right now, but let's be real. I am concerned about Trevor Simeon in a walking boot. I was loving Emmanuel Sanders this week at Jacksonville. I kind of thought that they would continue with this. It seemed like the Denver Broncos came out after their bye with a little more confidence in Simeon and let him throw it all over the field. He looked really good. Trevor Simeon looked really good in his loss to the Chiefs, and now he's in a walking boot. So that went to Hades in a handbasket. But, I think you can go back to the fantasy point chasing well on a couple of these players that I know are not, dicey, I guess would be the word that probably people would say. But I think Marcus Wilson is someone you're going to have to pay attention to. Here's my thing about where Chicago is. They're going to have to throw the ball to keep up with people. Chicago's defense isn't stopping anyone. Colin Kaepernick's red hot right now. The 49ers are allowing 169.7 receiving yards per game. That has to go somewhere. Now, there were 11 drops last week committed by the Chicago Bears. They need to get it together, but a lot of those came from Cameron Meredith. I think that he trusts Marcus Wilson a little bit more, and he's incredibly cheap in DFS. 59th priced on DraftKings at $4,000. You can use that money elsewhere, like we were talking about. Because I want to pay up at quarterback and running back, I got to get the Marcus Wilsons of the world, and I think that that's okay.
Yeah, well, and to your point, he led the team in targets with 11. So obviously, he has some rapport with Barkley that none of us saw coming.
Right. They don't want Barkley to throw it 50 times a game. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it'll be that kind of intensity, but I do think they're going to have to throw more than they're comfortable with. I also like Jordan Howard this week, though, as well. But I think they're going to throw more than that towards the end of the game. And I think that, again, at the end of the game, you go to guys that you trust. And it seems like Barkley trusts Wilson more than anyone else on the field. So that is why he is my pick this week.
Yeah. Dan, what about you? Receivers you're starting and sitting this week?
I can't believe it, but I'm going back to the well with Marvin Jones.
No. Dan, don't do it.
I know, but you know what? You look at his pricing, and it's dropped to basically a season low since he started, at least from when he broke out on DraftKings. Meanwhile, he saw a season high 11 targets last week against the Vikings. It looks like they're starting to work him back into that offense. And again, we got a real big shootout potential coming here against the Saints. And according to PFF's wide receiver cornerback chart, Jones is lined up on the majority of his snaps at left receiver, and this is good news because the Saints cornerback Delvin Breaux has lined up primarily at right cornerback. Obviously, this would be awful news in 2015, but Breaux hasn't been himself since returning from a broken leg that he suffered earlier this season, and he's posted negative grades in the red in consecutive games, sandwiched in between a missed Week 11 with an injury. So I like the matchup a lot individually and overall. And then as far as guys I'm sitting, I really don't like Kenny Britt this week. I know I talked about earlier about Todd Gurley and how Belichick wants to get rid of the top player, but Belichick doesn't even really need to do any game planning to get rid of Kenny Britt. And I get it. Kenny Britt has scored in 2 of the past 4 weeks. He had a 130-yard week a few weeks before that. He has been pretty solid wide receiver 3/wide receiver 2, but again, this matchup is just not good for him. One-on-one, I don't care, even if he's using in one-on-one coverage. Malcolm Butler, he's come a long way from that guy who was the Super Bowl hero. Now he's really one of the most elite cornerbacks in the NFL. He's top 5 in pass coverage grade this season, and he's going to shut down Kenny Britt in one-on-one coverage, and he's going to probably match up with Britt more than anyone else. So I'm off on Britt.
Okay. All right, let's wrap things up with a tight end to start and sit. Brandon, you go first. Greg Olson's your sit, I think. I think we've covered that, right?
Yeah, I mean, he is, which is very sad. But Seattle Seahawks are obviously a tough defense, but I'm more concerned about Cam Newton than I am anything else. I think the most points they're going to get is from Cam maybe going in for a touchdown, but the guy can't complete passes. That really concerns me. I'm going to say Vance McDonald again because once again, for me, there are just so few bargains at running back and quarterback right now that I actually like, that I want to save money. I want to save as much possible money at tight end because it's a crapshoot. And before anyone else says, oh, no, there's this other thing, this logic. No, go look at who the top tight ends are right now. It's disturbing. And you know what? Touchdown dependent, great. It's a tight end. If I can't get steady production at yards and catches anyway, why wouldn't I want someone who has at least the potential to get a touchdown? But This guy isn't touchdown dependent. He's also a high floor guy. He has 6 or more targets in every outing since week 7. He has 50+ yards and or a touchdown each week since their week 8 bye. He's on a hot streak. His price is way, way low. He's tied for 19th on DraftKings, 18th on FanDuel. There's just nothing to be upset about. $2,900 on DraftKings. Vance McDonald, a guy who's more consistent than everyone else, who's like double the price.
There you go. You heard it here first. Dan, tight ends you're starting and sitting this week.
Yeah, and me and Brandon don't compare notes before the show. Unfortunately, maybe we should start because I had a whole thing on McDonald myself.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Add to it because I got more. Because I'm going back to the Eric Ebron well, too.
I'll go to another well because this is kind of what we can do with the tight end position. Just go in random wells and start pulling out stuff because, hey, like you mentioned, it's a pretty disgusting position this year. But I like Will Tye of the Giants, and not because I think Will Tye is some like unbelievable play this week, but I think the circumstances work in his favor. One, he played 90% of the snaps or 88% of the snaps last week, his highest percentage of the season. Giants have completely turned him over to a workhorse role at tight end. He's one of the few tight ends in the NFL with that kind of snap percentage. And 2, the Steelers have been banged up at linebacker, so I think it kind of works in his favor there. The Giants are going to have to throw the ball a lot in this game because the Steelers are going to put up points at home. So I like Will Tye. He's also cheap if I'm not going McDonald. As far as who I'm sitting, I don't want Cameron Brate in my lineups. I get it. He's hot right now. He scored recently, so people are kind of chasing those touchdowns, chasing those points. But again, I talked earlier why I don't like Jameis Winston, and the reasons are very similar for somebody like Brate. So I'm kind of off on that one.
Okay. Well, that'll do it for this early edition of the Fantasy Slants. For Brandon, Marianne Lee, and Dan Schneier, we'll see you next time.